son of a sailor.
Good morning, South Coast, and welcome to Maritime Matters. This is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute. I'm actually here with one of my faculty, Captain Robert C. Glover III. He's actually the Director of Education, Continuing Education at Northeast Maritime Institute. But we're really here to talk about Bob's experience at sea, his experience on tall ships, and really how he and the programs he's worked in have changed young people's lives. And really, it's one of my personal passions is making sure that the sea offers opportunities for people for employment, but also to become whole people. And welcome, Bob, and thanks for coming.
Well, good morning, and pleasure to be here.
It is exciting to have you in this forum to talk about all of your experiences. We sit around the coffee table every morning from 7:30 till about 8:15 telling sea stories and really having fun with our students to talk about their experiences. But
right.
This is an opportunity for us to share with the public some of your personal experiences and how things have fleshed out for you career-wise.
Yeah, sure. This is what I think what doesn't get realized in our industry is, Eric, I'm a product of that early experience of being exposed to the maritime world, and that my family wasn't nowhere near maritime. They were printers, they were carpenters, and we were down in Newport when I was very young. At one time, I was about 13 years old, and we were walking around the docks of Newport and sort of a family outing, and we walked by this traditional vessel, and my mom saw the gleam in my eye, and I think so very often we'll get into this conversation and say, "How'd you get into the maritime world?" And I said, "Well, I lovingly blame my mother." But it was really true, and she sort of nudged me as only moms can do, and sort of pushed me in that direction and said, you need to talk to the captain and see if you can get on the vessel somehow. And I'm 13 years old, I'm scared death of that kind of stuff. And so I did it, and of course I got the typical old Yankee New England response from the captain. He said, "Son, you go home and put a little bit of meat on your bones, and come talk to me." So I was a scrawny 13-year-old,
Sure.
But what happened was I came back the very next weekend, and the vessel just happened to be moving from Newport waterfront over to Goat Island for the boat show. And he said, "Hop on board. I could use an extra hand." And as they say, the rest is history. I mean, I started working every single weekend on the boat, and I started in the galley. I started at the bottom of the barrel, as they say, and started washing dishes and getting used to the routine of the vessel. And to me, at that age, it's excitement, it's different, and it was a job. And I had an unusual summer every summer going sailing when other kids were doing what most kids, teenagers, do through their high school years in the summertime. But I was doing something very, very different. And it gave me that love for the sea. And to make a long story short, what happened was I didn't realize what it was doing to my character. I didn't realize what it was doing to me personally, in that it at an early age, it was building these issues of responsibility, of communicating what I was doing, of communicating subtle leadership skills that I would not really use until later, but because I was so exposed to it, those things were morphing inside my character as a person, this issue of honesty. I tell people about the simple story the very next season when we were fitting out in the springtime, and we were varnishing down in the captain's cabin. And as two folks who were working, I was working with an older gentleman, and we spilled some varnish. And so we cleaned it all up, and we were done, and we went back to varnishing, and 4 hours later, the cap came back to the vessel. And lo and behold, Steve goes up on deck, we were doing something, and he went over and told the captain that he had spilled the varnish. And I'm scratching my head going, why did you tell him? You made a mistake. You spilled the stuff. He would have never known. We cleaned it up. But it was that little single event that said, you need to be honest with what you're doing. And it's those kind of events in the maritime industry where you learn to connect those events to you're a close-knit team. And if you're not being straightforward with what happens on the vessel and what happens with events, whether they're good or unfortunate, that it'll come back to burn you. And I think you carry those things ashore from the maritime world that you often don't see when you're on land, as it were. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but when you're living within 100 feet or 300 feet, you are your fire department, you are the police department, you are the psychological department. You can't run and hide from anything. So it presents this opportunity where you're either going to live or die, as they say, and so you learn to live together as a team, and it becomes very close-knit.
Sure. No, it's funny because, as you know, our three tenets of success at Northeast Maritime Institute that we impart to our students is honesty, integrity, and hard work. And if you can get those three down, you're going to be extremely successful in whatever path you take. And it's funny that you talk about, your colleague, telling the truth, without the captain would not know it if he didn't tell him. Yeah. I was taught at a very early age that the untold truth is no different than a lie. And I think in maritime safety and operating a vessel, we have to really ensure that we're all in tune with what goes on and what happens on board the vessel. Because if somebody makes one mistake, then you have that, what's typical in a marine casualty is a chain of errors. And one little mistake, something as simple as spilling something. Somebody slips, hits their head, now they're a little bit unconscious or not with it. They get on the helm, they steer a different course, all of a sudden you end up on the rocks. One thing leads to another. Sure. So imparting all of that truth or information is one of the critical aspects of becoming a great mariner. And again, I've always said mariners are the salt of the earth. You might not like what they have to say, but they're going to say it.
They're going to say it anyways.
So that's a neat thing. What vessel was that you were on, actually?
At an early age, that was a vessel called the Bill of Rights. It was a two-masted schooner that had been built for the passenger trade that started sailing out of Newport, Rhode Island in the early 70s. The vessel was launched in 1971, and I spent about 4 years on that vessel, and it gave me that love for the sea that eventually had me attend here on the South Coast Tabor Academy, which also had a training vessel, and I spent 2 straight years on that vessel while I attended Tabor, and again, developed. Now it was escalating up. This vessel went coastwise. It did ocean passages, several trips to Bermuda. So now it took on a whole different light of seriousness, because now you were traveling outside of land. I took those bedrock foundational, both maritime skills I learned and personality traits, and then now we're seeing them that now they had to be very serious because now you were traveling offshore. And at a young age at Tabor, you're 16, you're 17 years old, and then you're standing watch by yourself. You're being sent up aloft at night to furl sails, and the watch officers are expecting you to carry that stuff out and report back. So it was very much a second stage maturing process.
It's funny. You first mentioned the Bill of Rights, and many of the old timers around the greater New Bedford area, the South Coast, remember the Bill of Rights. It used to come here often. Was in Woods Hole, in Martha's Vineyard, and Vineyard Haven quite a bit. I remember the Bill of Rights. As a matter of fact, I believe we have some photographs of the Bill of Rights at Northeast Maritime Institute on the wall. And, then you talked about your Tabor experience. And often people don't understand Tabor Academy. They think it's just a school for rich kids, and you've told me some stories about how you got there. And this is a common theme about Tabor. It's not just a school for rich kids. It's a school for kids who really take interest, that have great grades, that take interest in the maritime industry. It is known as the school by the sea, and they're doing really wonderful things. I know I've sent my 3 children there. My third and last starts as a freshman this year. But tell me about your experience. How did you get to Tabor Academy? And how'd you like it?
It's interesting, when and what you brought up, when you look at it from the outside, you thought I would have been the last person that would have went to Tabor. I was a son of a carpenter, and my mom was a waitress, worked in the restaurant industry, and you thought, how would I ever have the opportunity to go there? But I had a mentor on Bill Wright's who saw the opportunity. He talked to the captain of the Tabor Boy at the time and said, this kid needs to be here. And of course, he knew I didn't have the means to go there. So there was this sort of plot, if you will, a positive plot going on in the background to get me there and to apply. And then I had another gentleman who helped, helped with the finances. And I literally didn't learn that until almost 20 years later. My parents put in money. I had to work. Every summer I worked. My measly $500 went to my, Tabor education. And Tabor gave me a scholarship, a sailing scholarship at the time, which was kind of unheard of. But it really came down to they convinced the headmaster, who at the time was James Wickenden, that I needed to be there. So Tabor is that kind of school. It sees the potential in a person, and they made it happen. And it changed my life, and very much for the positive. I was in high school, public high school, and there's nothing against there's great public high schools, but I went through public high schools. I kind of didn't do homework, and I still got bys with B's and C's and maybe occasional D. But when I went to Tabor, they showed me that I could study, I could learn, and I could maintain a B average. And it truly prepped me for the next jump, which was to go to a Maritime Academy. And so it was kind of a unique story. I was the last person who probably ever should have went, but they saw me as a person, and saw the potential that I could, give back to, the community and help our society. And that's the uniqueness of Tabor, is that they were able to do that.
Yeah, no, it is a common theme at Tabor. There are many, many kids that get to go based on their initiative, and not necessarily their financial means, if at all,
exactly.
Which is just fantastic. And I know I'm a proud parent of Tabor students, and I see what they've done for my children, and it's just fantastic. You went off to Maine Maritime Academy.
Yep.
You spent 4 years there. Yep. You came out with a third mate's unlimited license, which is any size vessel in the world you could be a mate on. Tell me about that experience.
Well, it was obviously a challenge, but I felt like with my maritime background, it prepared me, and Tabor prepared me for that. There were maritime courses that I actually took at Tabor. So it was a fantastic, 4 years for me. I very much got involved in the community there. I became an EMT. I was on the local ambulance. I worked in local restaurants, and so I could have the spending money and put into my books and things like that. And it very much prepared me for what I was going to face when I graduated. That's always a scary event. I think when you're in college, you go through 4 years, and hey, this is pretty nice living, and then you hit the 4 years, and you're like, now I got to go out and make a living.
Yeah.
So you hit that point, and they helped me with job placement and looking at different opportunities. And for my world, because I was very much for those smaller vessels, I was really intrigued with the whole tugboat industry. And so that's where kind of my focus was in looking at job opportunities, and found one with Crowley Maritime Organization, what was called Crowley Maritime Corporation at the time, and they are now out of Seattle. So I took a job with them and moved out to Seattle, and spent pretty much the next 8 years working for them and traveling all up and down the West Coast, Hawaii. I spent years in Alaska, up in the Bering Sea and Prudhoe Bay, just mostly on the wire, they call it, towing barges. During the summertime, I was the mate on their salvage tug, so that's where I spent most of my time, up in Alaska, Bering Sea, Prudhoe Bay, as mate on their salvage tug.
Yeah, when you talk about it, I'm often jealous for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute. I'm here with Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education at Northeast Maritime Institute. And we're here not talking about the Institute so much as Robert's experience starting at 13 years old, moving forward throughout his career, going from working on tall ships in the summer to Tabor Academy to Maine Maritime to working on tugboats at Crowley Maritime. And I have to say, I'm often jealous when Robert talks about these experiences of going to Hawaii and Alaska. You know, these are really pristine places in our American territories, and that must have been quite an experience. I grew up on very large ships, as you know, 3 football fields long, LNG tankers. I had never worked on a tug, and I always often think, how would I have responded deep sea on a tugboat when I was on such a large boat? Even a hurricane didn't really mess with us. And did you have any moments where you thought, what the heck am I doing out here?
Yeah, I think, you know, you do it at different points of your seagoing life. 2 specifically was we made a trip to Hawaii. There's a run that Crowley has. It runs sort of triangle. It runs from Seattle down to Portland, Oregon, and then leaves there, goes down the coast, and goes out to Hawaii, and then they come back to Sacramento and then back up the coast. And they call it the Hawaiian Marine Lines run. And we were towing 2 400-foot barges at a time, and we did it in February. And this is the one time, it might have been maybe 80, 84, 85, when there was one particular winter where there were just these freight train low systems that were coming across the Pacific and slamming into California and Southern California, and a lot of homes were being washed away down in Monterey and places like that.
Remember that. I actually remember that.
And this was in February, and it took us 28 days to get to Honolulu. And we averaged about 4 knots for the whole entire trip, and it was just one low pressure system after another. We'd get up to 7, 8 knots, and then 2 days later we'd be back down to 1.5 knots, pretty much hove to, waiting for the sea to lay down. And that particular trip, it's definitely what you were thinking. It's like, what am I doing here?
Sure.
This is a little monotonous,
Sure.
So
it must be exhausting. Actually.
It is exhausting because when you're sleeping, you're wedged into your bunk, and even though you're sleeping, your muscles are still fighting to keep you from moving around. So you sometimes wake up more physically tired than when you went to sleep.
Sure. I someday I hope to do an ocean voyage on a tug, because I want to know I can say that I did it. Because I think you have to be a really unique mariner to be able to do that. From tugboating, you really went back to your roots, and you got excited about the tall ship industry, I believe. And
I did, yeah.
Tell us about that.
It sort of changed in that I had the opportunity to get back into the tall ship industry, which hence I came from, and so I got involved with a company called Vision Quest, which is a rehabilitation program for adjudicated youth. It's been around for over 30 years. It's based in Tucson, Arizona, but they had a very large East Coast division, and they operated 2 tall ships, which, what goes around comes around, as they say, and they were actually operating the Schooner Bill of Rights at the time. And so I saw this opportunity to go back to a vessel and be the master of the vessel that I started on. And so how could you resist that,
Sure.
Back I went and started working for the organization, and I ended up, both my wife and I, she sailed with me, and by this time I was married, and we sailed we started right over here in Fall River, and got on the vessel in Fall River and took it all the way down to Florida, over to Pensacola, and came all the way back. And it was about 10 months and on the vessel. And so I got back in the tall ship industry, and at that point in your life, you're starting to think about, what am I going to do long term? Why am I here? What am I doing? And I think even subtly, I started realizing that here was the opportunity to start giving back to people in the maritime world, and that's where it started. When you start working with adjudicated kids, and you see what's going on in the world, it starts making you think, how can I leave this place better? And so that really, and the tall ship industry has always been about that. Sailing on a tall ship, you see beautiful sunrises and sunsets, and it's kind of unique, and you're moving across the ocean by the wind. But the vessels are a platform that is creating the opportunity to change people's lives for the better that we used to happen as a maritime industry. We would see people become captains of 3-rig square riggers, back in the late 1800s by the time they were 22 and 23 years old. I mean, that's unheard of, but that was commonplace back then. Well, why? Because of what the vessels did to those people from a standpoint of maturing them and giving them responsibility and giving them leadership skills. And those same things can happen today. So that's what you're seeing in the tall ship industry, and that's why I got back involved in it, is that you see this opportunity to put young adults on the vessel, and it embodies that whole opportunity to build their character and put back the honesty and everything else.
Absolutely. It's when we come back, we're going to talk about some of your other experiences on tall ships, but I really want to talk about people building a little bit later on in the show.
Sure.
This is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute, talking to you about Maritime Matters on WBSM 1420 AM. Good morning, South Coast. This is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute on Maritime Matters, WBSM 1420 AM. I'm here with Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education at Northeast Maritime Institute. We're talking about Captain Glover's career experiences, how he started off at 13 years old on the tall ship Bill of Rights as a galley man, as they call him, to becoming the captain of the Bill of Rights, working with adjudicated youth. From there, he went on to where, Robert?
Well, from there, I ended up going to one or two other organizations within the tall ship industry. Went over to about 8 years with the Pride of Baltimore II down in Baltimore, Maryland, and was her captain, and basically took that vessel all over the world, doing a mission of goodwill and economic development for the state of Maryland. And then went to the Kalmar Nickel Foundation in Wilmington, Delaware, and I was the executive director of that nonprofit organization and helped that vessel get certified by the Coast Guard so that she could earn her keep, as it were, as we call it, and helped to rebuild their volunteer organization so that they could establish consistency in their operation. And then had the opportunity to, in our industry anyways, be involved in a new vessel construction, which I couldn't turn down, and went to Norfolk, Virginia, where the Commonwealth of Virginia was helping a nonprofit called the Virginia Maritime Heritage Foundation to build a replica of a pilot schooner from the turn of the century, about 1917, and was the executive director there, so I helped fundraise and oversaw, sort of was the owner's rep to the builder, and we built a Subchapter T SSV compliant, U.S. Coast Guard compliant vessel for the Commonwealth of Virginia.
So the schooner Virginia was a brand new build. We had the United States Coast Guard on the show last week,
okay.
and they talked about their involvement. How did you interface with the Coast Guard?
Well, it was an interesting event. I had done it through normal vessel inspections on all the different vessels I had operated or been involved in. So the building process was a complete change in that we had to jump, right in up to our necks, as it were, with the Coast Guard with a new build. This started out right at the design concept. When you're going to build a vessel that is going to meet the regulatory process, depending on the size of the vessel. In the United States, you can't have a wooden vessel certified more than 100 tons if it's going to carry passengers for hire. There's another regulation called the SSV, or Sailing School Vessels Act, and the vessels can be up to 300 ton if they're wood. We were looking for both. So we had to work with the Coast Guard local office there in Norfolk and get the drawings. They were sent to headquarters. You look at stability, you look at fire safety, vessel construction, integrity, watertight integrity, safety standards, all that gets put through the ringer. And then we go through the whole building process. Coast Guard's there about every week or two, making sure that we're following the design plans, working with us if we see potential changes or things that could be done better, right up until the launching. After the launching, they're involved in the initial stability process that happens when the vessel's built. They come and watch us do man overboard drills, fire drills, make sure that the vessel can perform how designed. And so then after that, it's every year they come out and do a vessel inspection. So the interface with the Coast Guard is constant. And it's never adversary. It's very much a working relationship that helps the vessel, maintain a standard that so she can go anywhere in the world. And this particular vessel was the only Subchapter T vessel that actually had an oceans license, which is pretty unusual.
It is pretty neat, and of course you and I went down to look at Schooner Virginia a few years ago, and what a great job you did getting that built. And I always love hearing how the relationship with the Coast Guard is non-adversarial, and folks really should get delighted about the Coast Guard and the mission that they carry out, because it's not just life-saving or law enforcement. It is naval architecture. It is systems design and analysis, and oil spill response and pollution response. And they have so many things that they're responsible for. It's always fascinating to me, how involved they are in our industry. We met. What, about 10 years ago?
10 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to believe. And you came to Fairhaven to lay roots down in Fairhaven, finished raising your two boys.
Yep.
You came to work at Northeast Maritime Institute. And not only are you a teacher at Northeast Maritime Institute, an instructor, but you were involved in our program. It was a conflict resolution between Israeli students and Palestinian students that we flew in as a joint project with the State Department to get these young adults to sail with each other on our tall ship, the Furtha. And most people probably don't know that there is a tall ship in New Bedford Harbor. It's one of the most famous ones around the country, and yet nobody pays attention to our little tall ship locally. But Furtha is probably one of the most beautiful tall ships in the world in terms of its quality and its craftsmanship. Can you talk a little bit about Furtha?
Well, she's as I tell folks, I've seen a lot of wooden vessels in my time, and have either inspected them or been around them or sailed on them. And when I came across Furtha for the first time in Newport and got to get aboard her, I was quite frankly stunned. You see a wooden vessel she was built in the mid '80s, and to see a vessel that's at her current age in the conditions she's in, and the quality of the build, the quality of the materials, the bronze work, everything else, and I was amazed. You don't often see that kind of craftsmanship. And then hats off to the owners. They recognized that, and they took on the attitude that they didn't own the vessel as much as they were passing on something that was a heritage. And so they owned the vessel in that light, and they kept the vessel at a high standard. So it's a great sailing vessel, as well as just she's pretty to look at, but she's done 2 circumnavigations of the Pacific. She's gone up and down the East Coast. So she's a stout vessel. She's hardy. She protects the people that sail on her, and so you can't ask much more of a vessel than that.
Yeah, no, it's the man with the vision to build Furtha was from New Zealand, and his name was Jack Butland, and Jack built Furtha in Auckland. And at McMillan and Wing Shipyard, and he had the vision of building a traditionally built vessel. I'm told it's the last traditionally built vessel in terms of how they put the wood together, how they construct the vessel of its type. And but one of the real amazing things about Furtha, it's made of kauri wood. What is that?
It's a wood that's kind of indigenous to New Zealand and Australia, and it's a wood that is no longer able to be harvested. It's kind of a rare wood in those two island countries, and because of that, you can't harvest it. You can't use it anymore. They're trying to get it to bring back the wood as far as the product. But Furtha there's no doubt that she's the largest collection, if you will, of kauri wood in the world, and she was built of that wood, and they were able to get all of that wood before all of these laws went into place down in New Zealand. And from a boat building standpoint, it's a boat builder's dream wood. The wood is very stable. In other words, it doesn't crack as it dries. It's long grained. It has a lot of strength to it. It maintains its shape. And it's resistant to bacteria, borers, things like that, because it's so hard and tight. So it's a great wood to build out of, and probably 80% of Furtha is built out of that wood. And then she has the typical, African mahogany and other woods, teak decks, things like that we're fond of. But it's her structure that is the strength of her.
Well, what amazes me is the kauri is actually represented on the interior of the vessel. The hull itself is demonstrated in the interior, and it's some of the most beautiful wood I've ever seen. Fairhaven project, for me personally, it was probably the thing I've been the most proud of. Taking for 5 years Israeli and Palestinian students, taking them to Fairhaven. Teaching them how to sail, teaching them how to become good citizens of the region that they are from, but starting to recognize one another as not enemies, but as human beings. And you got to participate in that as the master. What did you get out of that?
Well, what I got out of it is that I've sort of been on the personally was a result of sail training, as we call it. And that's such a broad term. It almost isn't a good term to use sometimes. But when you are part of the tall ship world and you see what they do for folks, we always think of it as an opportunity to just build oneself and our own individual character in this team environment. After participating with the Fairhaven project, what was extremely enlightening to it is here we were taking young adults and putting them into that. We were using that tall ship environment of having to work together, clean the vessel together, cook meals together, sail the vessel together, deal with whatever Mother Nature put in our way as far as weather and things like that. And now everything else that they were dealing with initially had to be put aside. So whatever was holding them back from dealing with each other in the cultures they were from had to be pushed aside. So that was the first thing that happened on the vessel, is that they realized that they had to take care of the vessel first, which is the mantra of any tall ship. You take care of the vessel first, then you take care of your shipmates, then the mission, and then yourself is fourth. And that's so contrary to our world right now. It's all about me, when you're on the beach. And so when they went through that, they were able to then, after they relaxed and they were here for a while, they went through this, then we were able to go back and revisit the cultural issues that gave them that. They were calmer. They were able to talk about it. And of course, we brought in, various people that would help them, as far as experts in those fields. But it took the vessel, it took that experience to break down all those barriers, to get them outside of that, to just realize they were just young adults, no different than anybody else in the world. And once that happened, then we were able to go back and help them realize that they were going to be the solution to their future.
It's funny because it was noted as one of the best conflict resolution tools ever provided through an aid program, and the results were amazing. And all of these kids today are extremely successful, and quite a few of them have immigrated over to Canada, working as engineers. One young lady is working towards her medical doctor's license, and it's just really amazing, and what an experience. And it makes you wonder in today's world. We seem to be living in an angry world politically, and we're all pointing the fingers at one another. And in that environment, they were too busy. It makes you wonder if we're not busy enough. It really does. And there's no time to be not busy, if you will, on a ship. So I think everybody better line up and start thinking about a maritime career. You'll have a much happier life.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But you have had a pretty extraordinary career. You and I started working together about 10 years ago. You've watched Northeast Maritime morph into something that was pretty unique in itself, but become the first private maritime college in the history of the United States. How does that make you feel? You an absolute big part of that.
Yeah. It has been an exciting time. It sometimes it took a while to get going, and you think in the back of your head, is this really going to fly? And now it's grown and it's on its feet and it's starting to run, and so it is exciting. It's an opportunity. I'm from the 4-year academy world, and those kind of opportunities weren't out there. So now we've given a whole different segment of our society, that opportunity in the maritime world. It's fulfilling those opportunities. It's not it's not even competing with the 4-year process. It's its own. It's fulfilling the need for what we have here in the maritime industry, of the current maritime status of our nation, of the fast ferries, the tugboats, all the tour vessels, the whale watching vessels, all these vessels that, because of what you heard last week, with the Coast Guard, is more regulations in process, and that needs to be. We need to deal with that, and so it takes more education, it takes more licensing, it takes more process, and so that's the need that we're fulfilling, is making that happen.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, the industry has changed, has morphed from a trade to a profession. Literally over the last 10 years, and the requirements of knowledge and compliance programs for the legal instruments that exist requires quite an education, and people don't realize that. We think of sailors as kind of these rough and tumble guys that go out to sea, and yet they're some of the most well-educated people in the world. Oh, yeah. And it is fascinating to see how the industry has changed over the period of time that you and I have witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute, here on Maritime Matters. And I'm here with Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education at Northeast Maritime Institute, and we're talking about his career, the evolution of the industry, his career in the tall ship world, his career at Northeast Maritime Institute, running our own tall ship, running education programs. You actually are moving from continuing education over to the college itself, the College of Maritime. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, the College of Maritime Science. And, that's going to be a pretty unique opportunity for you to reach some of our younger students. And, with your background working with youth in the past, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. How does that feel for you?
Yeah, it's going to be a great opportunity, because I've early on in my career, I had mentors, and mentors are people that we all need, whether we admit it or not. I mean, I don't care what industry you're in or what your life cycle is, whether it's your parents or whether it's a school teacher or a sport, and you hear about that stuff, but it takes somebody who's really involved in your life on a daily basis to mentor you. You can't mentor somebody if you meet with them, once every other month or something. So when we are mentored, whether it's professionally or mentally or spiritually, you need that involvement in the life. So I see the 2-year degree program as an involvement in, you're with the students every day and you're teaching them, but it's more than that. I think, today's young adults need not only the educational and the professional background, but they need to see how am I really going to respond to issues, whether they're emergencies or conflict, and how do I learn how to deal with it? That what we call sometimes emotional maturity. How do I respond to that in the workplace? How do I do that? And this is where I see our school sort of separating the difference between a lot of schools, is that we're trying to take our instructors and model that character in the classroom, and how we deal with simple things like, okay, you didn't get your homework done, so how are we going to deal with it? I mean, it's a very kind of basic issue, but how do we deal with those things? Or like I don't want to bring up last winter, but we had these big snowstorms, and now we can't have classes today. How are we going to deal with that? So how do you deal with that from a standpoint of decision making and leadership?
How do you problem solve?
How do you problem solve?
And I think the neat part about NMI is the fact that we're not just graduating mariners; we're graduating whole people, and that's our mantra for sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute. I'm here with Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education, and we'll be right back. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Eric DeWicki, president of Northeast Maritime Institute, talking to you on Maritime Matters. I'm here with Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education. And Robert, we talked about how you're going to be moving from continuing ed, training professional mariners who are already engaged in their careers, into the higher education program with people who have little to no maritime experience, and going into a degree program, moving into that degree program, and coming out with not only that degree, but a Coast Guard license and Coast Guard credentials to operate ships. It's pretty straightforward as to what we do, but there's a lot more behind the scenes that goes on into what we believe in at the school, and really our hope of growing whole people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when we take that issue of mentoring, I want to take it in a different direction. That the 2-year degree program not only looks at just the personality and the character development of mentoring, but there needs to be the reality of you can go to school and sit in a classroom and learn all these things, but how's it going to affect you when you graduate in 2 years and you have that license? We want to prepare the person to actually have the hands-on experience. So that's where our program, I think, really differs than a typical 2-year degree program, in that we're going to put you in the field. We're going to put you in the summertime on a vessel that's going to take what you learned the year preceding that, and we're going to put you on a vessel so that you can begin to see how to execute what you've learned. Then you're going to come back to school for another year, and you're going to go through the 2 semesters, and then you're going to go to sea again. And then you're going to get your license, and then you'll be more prepared. So it's mentoring on a hands-on basis. We're going to create those what we call cadet shipping opportunities for you to take what you've learned and skills, so that when you eventually do get your license, you're not stepping on a vessel cold. And I think that scares people sometimes. It's like like I said earlier, when you graduate after 4 years of college, now really life really starts, and a lot of people are worried about that. But I think ours is a transition, and we walk you through the steps. So it's a mentoring process too, from that side.
The cooperative education model is so important, I think, especially these days. It's a softer approach to be introduced to the guessing game of whether you want to be on that career path or not. And you go to school, you go to work, you go to school, you go to work. And that really is going to produce ultimately pretty fine mariners. And I'm excited about it, and it's modeled a little bit after Northeastern University, and they've been immensely successful with their internship programs, and I'm excited that we can offer that to our community and our students, and we're gleaning great results already, and that's kind of the nice part about it is we're seeing results, of the few students from the first cohort that we enrolled, they've grown as a result of that experience. That's for sure.
Well, that one of our cadets, he's already been to 4 continents in 90 days.
It's amazing.
I mean, it is amazing.
Yeah,
It just
yeah.
shakes my head. He's traveled farther than I ever went.
Yeah,
So.
Education, adventure, and employment, right?
Yeah,
It's that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we are certainly moving in the right direction there. We talked about character building, opportunities, career track. They certainly will earn a heck of a living. They graduate, they start off at about $49,000, $50,000 a year in their first year at work. But more importantly, there's more upward mobility. There's other options if they don't want to go to sea.
Yeah.
Where do you?
Well, that's the great thing about the maritime world is that you can go to sea, and you can spend your whole life going to sea and work on various vessels. You can move laterally within the industry, but just like an airline pilot, we have the opportunity to keep upgrading your license, both in tonnage and operation and vessel type. And you can go into the oil industry, or you can go into the cruise ship industry, or there's different parts of the industry that you can go in. Or a lot of folks, after a while, if you want to develop if you're going to have a family or you want to settle down, there's so many great things that you can do, as we say, on the beach. Whether it's working for the Port of New Bedford and helping in that area, there's port relations, there's vessel management for a company, whether it's a tugboat company, the steamship authority, or anything like that. You can get into the management side, and it's a very consistent theme for mariners is to get into the management side, because they have such great leadership skills that they've developed over the course of their career on the vessels that they can bring that ashore.
Yeah, it's a natural fit.
It's a natural
when you're
fit,
talking
yeah.
about leaders, I've never seen, quite honestly, better leaders. And as you know, I've spent 17 years in Washington and working on maritime policy issues, and I see politicians and government service personnel, and always some of the finest leaders that crop up are those that have actually worked on the water. And I'm proud to come from Fairhaven, New Bedford, where we are a maritime community, and I'm excited to really think that we're going to move this community forward based on its maritime roots. Robert, we have 2 minutes left. Tell me quickly, would you ever think about another career outside of the maritime career?
No, I for me, it was one of these things where it's funny. I was on the internet the other day filling out security questions of, for some website to log into, and one of the things they asked was, what did you first want to be? And it finally got back to me, and I had wanted to be a forest ranger. Wow. So that's what I had put down. But of course, that's before I ever got involved in the water. And I thought, where would I be if I was a forest ranger right now? I'd probably just be a forest ranger. So, to answer the question, the career in the maritime industry has created so many avenues to go down. And sometimes you can control things in life, and sometimes you can't. But I think it's been, it's put it this way, I never traveled in my life until I got on a boat. And since then, I've been all through Europe, parts of North, South America, the West Coast, Hawaii. I mean, all my traveling and seeing cultures and understanding the world better has been because of vessels.
Yeah, it is fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, we had the pleasure to have Captain Robert C. Glover III, Director of Continuing Education at Northeast Maritime Institute, spend an hour with us and talk about his career and really some of the delights of his career. And Robert, thank you very much for coming. And
So my pleasure.
thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to WBSM 1420 AM Maritime Matters. This is Eric DeWicki, President of Northeast Maritime.